Hi, I'm Allison Ellis of Floral Artistry. Thank you for tuning in. I talked a couple weeks ago about why you should set a minimum, and I wanted to talk today a little bit about how to set a minimum and really figuring out a strategy that works for you. Everybody's different. Everyone has a different business model, a different goal in terms of how big they're looking to be or how small they're looking to stay. And so everyone's minimum is it's such a personal decision. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to make this personal decision. Part of having a business is sort of this growing and changing and morphing, evolving. And sometimes what's working for you one year might not be working the next year. Maybe something will work for you consistently for like 10 years, and then all of a sudden there's a change in the air and you need to change too. So it's important to be, I think, fluid in your decision making. We set the rules, so we have to also be open to when it's time to change the rules or modify the rules or throw them out altogether. So when it comes to setting a minimum, I can tell you from personal experience, my very first encounter with a minimum spend was at a flower shop that was so beautiful, mostly cash and carry, did delivery, but really beautiful, beautiful shop. But the owner said, if anyone comes in inquiring about a wedding, tell them that we have $1,000 minimum, and they will turn right away and walk out. And that was his goal. He didn't want to deal with the wedding people. He didn't want to deal with brides. He just didn't want it. So we set the minimum and it turns people away. And even though that was, 15 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, it's a lesson that I think is still part of why you have the minimum. The minimum isn't there to draw people in, right? You're not like, hey, I have a $3,000 minimum, line on up. You're saying I have a $3,000 minimum because you want to weed out the people who don't want to spend that. That's what it is. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but you have to be real about why you're doing it and recognize that the reason you set a minimum is to turn people away who aren't a good fit and to have a minimum standard of maybe service that you provide or minimum sales that you accumulate for that weekend, right? Especially if you only do one wedding a weekend. It's really important that you understand what is the minimum amount that you're looking to make that weekend because you can only do a limited number of events. If you can take multiple events, then sure, you can have a lower minimum spend because you can send people out to different deliveries all in one day. Again, everybody's going to have their own set of standards, but I just want to talk about really how we determine our own, we use our own internal compass to determine these minimums. From personal experience, I didn't have a minimum at first because I just wanted to book weddings, right? So if you came to me, I would just quote you the best I could, closest to your budget. Probably never went over budget with anybody for many years. And I would just do everything I could to provide the lowest pricing on each item so that I could meet their pricing. And, as I got busier and got to a point where I had more inquiries than I could actually accommodate, I had to start setting some standards. So I don't know, I really truthfully don't remember now if my first minimum was like $1,500 or whatever. And then, of course, it went up. So $3,000 became the minimum. And as I would get inquiries from people, this worked great for years. $3,000 minimum. Okay, great. That's our budget. Okay, great. Let's, wheel and deal here. But the problem became I had this $3,000 minimum, but the events were getting bigger and I was providing a higher level of service and I had higher standards for, what the size of my designs should be or what sorts of flowers I should use. And so this $3,000 minimum became nothing more than arbitrary. It was arbitrary because most of my quotes were going out for closer to $4,000. So why am I putting a price out there in their mind? The customer's reading $3,000 on the website, but then when I give them a quote, it's higher. There's a psychology around that should not be ignored. That if you're putting a price out there to your customer and then you're coming in at a higher price, you're seeming expensive in comparison to yourself, okay? You're the one who planted the seed of $3,000, or again, whatever the minimum is. So at this point, through my evolutions of minimums and having it on my website and not having it on my website, I've come to this conclusion for myself at this point that it's better for me to not have a set minimum. Of course, I have some ideas of what I would like someone to spend each weekend, what I'd like to do one wedding of a certain size every weekend. But each event has a minimum. So when someone comes to me and they have 5 or 6 bridesmaids and 175 guests, and they want to rent my Birch Arbor and use it as a chuppah, and we'll be back the next day to break down, whatever the qualifications are for that wedding gets a minimum. It's based on how far I have to deliver. It's based on the types of flowers they want, the time of year, all the things that go into what they need. That's where I determine my minimum. So it's sort of along the lines of when you think about packages, right? The general rule is we don't want to provide packages for people because it doesn't feel custom. Well, that's sort of how I feel about the minimum. I have a custom minimum for each person, and I tell it to the person when I give the proposal. For your event, I request a minimum of X. And it makes it clear that if my proposal's, above that minimum, it maybe has some items I could take off and we could get to that $5,000 price point or $4,000 price point. But for your event, this is what I'm going to ask for you to commit to me financially in order for us to have this serious working relationship. And it works really well because I think people do realize that the pricing isn't arbitrary. It's based on their event and what they need. So here's something to think about when you're setting your minimum. Where is this number coming from? Is it coming from the average sale? Are you going to add up your average, all your sales for the year and divide it by the number of weddings and decide, okay, the average sale was $2,700, so I'm going to set a $3,000 minimum to try to bump that up for next year? Or is it going to be something that's more of an internal compass? I don't want to do as many events next year. I want a sales goal of this. And in order to get to this amount, and I have this many weekends to do it, well, this is what the sale needs to be each weekend. It can be very basic, like actual mathematical basis for why you're coming up with your minimum. Or it can just be a gut feeling of what it is that you feel you need in order to move forward with a client. When it comes to presenting the minimum, I think this is like the key piece of advice. You have to do it with confidence and clarity. So when I'm presenting a minimum to someone, I used to do it in every first email. I was just like, hi, nice to meet you in email. Here's my minimum. It worked. It was good. It worked for that point in my business. And maybe you're at a point in your business where that's a good strategy for you. For me, at this point, it's not how I feel. I want to tell them more. I want to be more personable. So if they can fill out my query form and tell me what their minimum is, and I read up all the little details that they've included, if it feels like, that's a reasonable starting point, I don't even bother mentioning the minimum again, like in an email, until, we actually talk. I put together a proposal and then I present it, including like the itemized pricing, the proposal, and like they see that it's worth spending the money. The other thing is sometimes you just know that the budget isn't going to work because they filled out the inquiry form, or they don't know what the budget is and you have a feeling that maybe they're not going to like what you have to say. So here is exactly what I say. I type in an email. Based on the details you sent, I would estimate a starting budget around $4,000 or whatever for what you requested. I make it really clear that it's because of what they want that I'm coming up with this number. And then the next sentence is very simple. If that's in line with your budget and you'd like to arrange a time to talk, I'd be happy to chat with you about the details. So you can have it be a friendly interaction. It's not this is my minimum, see you later. It's, hey, based on what you need, this is what I think I need to make that happen. And if that works for you, let me know and we'll talk. I can't wait to hear more about your wedding. Because we need to be approachable and we need to be reasonable. And we also need to be true to ourselves in terms of how we run our business. Really, do we want to be people who are super friendly and accommodating and approachable? Or do we want to be people who just shut you down before you can even tell me anything about your wedding? Nope, forget it. The other point about the minimum that's super important to keep in mind is it goes both ways. So you might be turning somebody off with your minimum, and that may be a good thing. Or you may be turning somebody off with your minimum who would have otherwise loved to work with you and spend that amount. They just needed more information from you first about why it's that minimum. Okay, so sometimes telling a customer the minimum rather, could turn them off when really they would have been more than willing to spend that had they just known what it was you could do for them for that price. The other thing is you set a minimum, and there may be people who have a really great budget who are wondering why your minimum is so low. That may be rarer in your experience, but it does happen where someone will say, I don't know, this person doesn't seem to have the same level of service that I'm looking for. So there are benefits to the minimum and drawbacks, so keep them in mind, balance them out, weigh the pros and cons for yourself, and again, where you're at right now in your business. Because if you have too many inquiries that you can't keep up with, and you're spending a lot of time with people who just simply don't fit your plan of what you need to have happen for your business, the minimum and putting it out there may be exactly what you need to do. Again, for me, I think I'm at a point where I realize everything is custom that I do, including the minimum. And that's what's working for me. And I'd love to find out what's working for you. You're more than welcome to shoot me an email, ask me questions, or just say how you go about approaching what your minimum is or how you determine your minimum. Because I think this is such an important topic in our industry. Because we are mostly really, really small businesses that need to figure out the balance between enough business and too much business and, booking that small gig because it came and then it getting in the way of booking a bigger wedding that really is more what we desire to do with our careers. So keep all these things in mind as you are working on your next season's events, because it's the time, right? We are getting those inquiries. We are booking. And I hope you are very, very busy and that you have a great season coming up. Keep doing beautiful work. Stay tuned. Like my video if you like it. If you don't already subscribe, please do so. And I have more really exciting videos, and I'm not just saying that. Really exciting stuff coming up about proposal writing and profit margins for floral designers. And I'm going to take you behind the scenes of my business and show you exactly how I do some of my super top secret wedding work. So the business side, that is. So anyway, stay tuned. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. All right, now it's time for me to get started working on my 2 weddings that are going to finish out my busy season. I am so excited to be done with the wedding season and looking forward to what's up next year, but I must admit that both of these weddings fall below my minimum. Big time fall below my minimum. However, for what each bride wants, this minimum spend for each of them is completely reasonable. And when I put these 2 small events together, it makes for a nice little wedding weekend that does meet my minimum. And it's up to me. I'm the decider. I can decide, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I booked both of these small events because I didn't get another bigger one. So, sometimes we have to take our chances and break our own rules. So, get out there and break some rules.